They smiled at me across the mahogany dinner table as if I were a ghost in pearls, present, but irrelevant. They brought me wine I didn't ask for, served me food I didn't like, and laughed at jokes I wasn't meant to understand. But what they didn't know was that every dollar their empire rested on had my name etched into it, quietly, legally, and irrevocably. I gave them a kingdom in silence, and they repaid me with betrayal. So I took it all back, in silence. I'm Evelyn Moreau, and I've spent the last 25 years pretending to be less than I am. To them, I'm just the elegant old woman with silver hair and well-cut blouses, sipping tea with perfect posture. The type who used to be sharp, but is now best left to quiet corners at family parties. They assume I don't understand balance sheets anymore, that I forget conversations, that I'm sweet and fragile, and that I'd never catch on if they plotted something cruel behind my back. But I was once the CFO of Ashcroft Financial Holdings, back when that meant something in New York. Before women in boardrooms were fashionable. Before my name was wiped from press articles so Marcus, my son, could shine without the burden of having a powerful mother hovering over him. He didn't want my legacy. He wanted the appearance of building everything from scratch. So I gave him that illusion, and much more. I invested $10 million into his company, Brickmore Real Estate, through layered trusts, silent partnerships, and anonymous capital vehicles. I didn't need credit. I didn't want it. I just wanted him to succeed. But success made them arrogant. Layla came into the picture with stilettos, red lipstick, and a smile that knew exactly what it wanted. She studied my son like a balance sheet, identifying every weakness, every desire, and every blind spot. And she played him like a violin. I watched her charm Marcus, push him toward riskier projects, and slowly maneuver her way into board decisions I was still technically funding. But they never thanked me. Not once. In fact, over the years, they treated my presence more like an inconvenience than a gift. I overheard Layla once at a dinner party, whispering to a friend that I was the queen on the chessboard they were waiting to retire. They thought I didn't hear, but I did. And that's when I started documenting everything. They invited me to the penthouse for dinner on a Thursday evening, which was unusual. Marcus rarely called unless Layla prompted him, and Layla never did anything without an ulterior motive. Still, I accepted. I wore my pearl necklace, his late father's gift to me on our 10th anniversary, and the dark green silk blouse I knew Layla secretly hated. I showed up with a bottle of Bordeaux they couldn't afford without my money, just to keep the power balance slightly tilted in my favor. The moment I stepped through the polished glass doors, I felt it, the forced warmth, the practiced smiles, the air thick with pretense. "Oh, Mother, you look radiant," Layla said with a brightness so false it practically flickered. "Still walking on my own 2 feet, dear." "That's more than I can say for your stock prices," I replied, smiling sweetly. Her jaw tightened. Marcus cleared his throat. "Let's sit. We made your favorite duck à l'orange." They didn't know I stopped liking that dish years ago. But it wasn't about the food. It was never about the food. We made small talk over dinner, mostly about how tough the market is and how competition is brutal. I sipped my wine and nodded like the aging fool they took me for, waiting for them to get to the point. They didn't disappoint. "Mom," Marcus finally said, setting down his glass, "there's something we need to talk about. It's about your estate." I looked at him, carefully blank. "My estate?" Layla chimed in like she was discussing the weather. "We've been speaking to some people. Legal advisors. Given your age and health, we think it's wise to consider guardianship. Just for protection." Ah, there it was. The betrayal, gift wrapped in concern. "My health," I repeated slowly. "You mean my mind?" Marcus winced. "We've just noticed some memory lapses. Confusion. You forgot the name of your accountant last week." "I dismissed my accountant last week, Marcus," I said coolly. "That's why I couldn't recall his name. Would you like me to remind you how I structured your initial series of funding in 2015? Shall I recite the convertible note terms? They exchanged a glance. But Layla pushed forward. We're only trying to help. You have so many accounts. Properties. Holdings. It's becoming a lot for one person. I folded my napkin. Interesting, because a month ago, you requested access to my trust documents. Quietly, through your lawyer. Layla's face flushed. Marcus's eyes widened. I still have contacts, I continued softly. The same ones who helped me trace every wire transfer I ever made into Brickmore. The same ones who confirmed that without my capital, discreetly injected through shell entities, your company wouldn't have made it past year 2. They were silent now. I stood slowly, placing my wine glass down. You see, dear children, I may be old, but I'm not obsolete. And if you're bold enough to try and take what's mine, then I suppose I must remind you who gave it to you in the first place. I walked out without another word. But that night, I made the first phone call. And I gave the order that would end Brickmore. The next morning, I wore a tailored gray suit, flats instead of heels, and my late husband's vintage wristwatch, an elegant, quiet armor for war. I didn't go to the spa. I didn't visit my book club. I went to the office, my office on the top floor of a building that still bore the Moreau name in bronze lettering. A place Marcus always believed had been sold off years ago. My assistant, Clara, had been with me for 15 years and never asked questions she didn't need to. When she saw me step into the executive suite, she simply offered a cup of Earl Grey and nodded toward the terminal. They sent a follow-up, she said quietly. Urgent request for signatures on estate transfer documents. Overnight courier this time. Excellent, I said, taking the documents from her and placing them beside the shredder. By noon, I'd begun unwinding everything. First, I contacted Delacourt Holdings, the blind trust managing $2 million of the Brickmore liquidity pool, and gave formal notice to liquidate and withdraw. Then I reached out to Hawthorne Equity, another shell under my control, which held controlling interest in 3 of Brickmore's major development sites. Those properties would now be sold, not to competitors, but to real estate holding companies I personally established under pseudonyms. Each call was legal, each step precise. I had spent a lifetime navigating contracts more twisted than any betrayal. This wasn't revenge, it was surgery. Delicate, deliberate, final. The most painful part? I wasn't doing it out of spite. I had loved my son more than life. I had trusted Layla, even when she raised red flags. I wanted them to flourish. But they looked at my kindness and saw weakness. They saw the millions I quietly gave and assumed I had more to lose than they did. They thought they could steal from me, and I'd stay seated at the table they set for me. But I was the one who built the table. By sunset, my withdrawals triggered alerts across Brickmore's internal finance systems. Their liquidity dropped below the threshold for their ongoing projects. And I hadn't even pulled the final thread yet. I returned home just before dark. My penthouse was quiet, high above the noise of the city, lit with golden hour's final glow. I turned on the news. Sources say Brickmore Real Estate is facing a potential cash flow crisis, with several key investors reportedly pulling funds. CEO Marcus Moreau has yet to issue a statement. I poured myself a small glass of sherry. No statement could fix what was coming next. 2 days passed before Marcus called me. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. The markets had caught wind of the sudden investor exit, and Brickmore's share value, already inflated from their last over-leveraged acquisition, was plummeting. Banks were nervous. Partners were pulling out. Headlines were circling. And worst of all, Layla's curated image of effortless power was cracking under public scrutiny. When my phone rang, I let it buzz 3 times before answering. Mother, Marcus said, his voice tight. No charm, no warmth. Just panic under a silk veil. Marcus, I replied calmly, slicing a pear at the breakfast table. You sound tense. I need to see you. In person. Today. I could imagine him pacing, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. Layla probably just threw something across their marble countertop. I'll be at my club until 4, I said. After that, I'm unavailable. He showed up by 3. The club I mentioned wasn't a bridge club or a senior center. It was the Moreau Private Executive Lounge, something I purchased quietly 2 years ago when they assumed I was playing bingo. I sat at a corner table with glass walls behind me, letting the city's skyline stretch out like a painting. Marcus arrived flushed, frantic, and 2 decades older than the last time I truly looked at him. You pulled the funding, he said, skipping any greeting. You did this. I sipped my tea. You made it necessary, I said evenly. You and your wife. You're destroying everything I've built. No, darling. I'm removing what I built. You simply attached your name to it. He slammed his hand on the table. I didn't flinch. The others in the room, a few high-powered investors I knew by name, glanced over. Let them see. Let them whisper. You'll ruin us, he hissed. You'll ruin me. I set my cup down. You tried to declare me unfit to control my own estate. You had your lawyer draft guardianship papers behind my back. You called me senile. Marcus, you didn't just bite the hand that fed you. You tried to cut it off. His mouth opened, but there were no words. And worst of all, I continued, my voice quieter now, you forgot who I am. He collapsed into the chair across from me, defeated. Is there any way to fix this? He asked, almost in a whisper. Layla, she didn't mean Layla meant every word I said. And you let her. He stared at the floor. Brickmore will go bankrupt, I said gently. The board is panicking. The headlines will worsen. And when the dust settles, people will remember your name. Not as the man who built something great, but as the fool who lost it. Silence hung between us. Thick, heavy, final. I stood up and placed a velvet envelope on the table. Inside was a copy of the original contract, my signature authorizing the first $2 million investment into Brickmore. A document never made public. Dated. Stamped. Undeniable. Frame it, I said. Or burn it. I don't care. Then I walked away, leaving him with the truth that had always been there. He never owned the crown. He just wore it because I let him. I expected her visit. Layla never lets someone else close the chapter, not when she can author the final line herself. She arrived 3 days after Marcus's breakdown, dressed like a widow at a high society funeral, black designer dress, oversized sunglasses, and a purse that likely cost more than the monthly salaries of my former house staff. The doorman called up before letting her in. I told him to send her up. She stepped into my penthouse like she still believed she had the upper hand, eyes scanning the marble floors, the gold-trimmed art, the same priceless sculpture she once mocked for being too old money. Evelyn, she said with the tone reserved for women who pretend to like their mother-in-law. You look, well. I am, I replied, motioning to the chair opposite me. Though I can't say the same for Brickmore. She didn't sit. She prowled. You've made your point, she said after a moment, removing her sunglasses. Marcus is shattered. The board is preparing for bankruptcy. Investors are threatening lawsuits. You've nuked the very legacy you wanted to preserve. No, dear, I said softly. I removed the illusion of a legacy you both twisted for personal gain. She dropped her purse on the table, leaning in. You think you've won, she hissed. But this affects you too. Your name is tied to that company, whether you like it or not. When it sinks, so does your reputation. You'll be remembered not as a savior, but a saboteur. I smiled. That's where you're wrong. Your name is all over the crumbling ledgers, the botched expansions, the frivolous spending. The documents I released this morning show every anonymous shell investor, every dollar funneled through my vehicles into Brickmore, and every legal claim I've quietly withdrawn before the crash. Her expression faltered. What? I removed my liability. I kept the receipts. You should have read the fine print on those NDA-bound funding agreements. She stumbled back a step. That mask of power, flawless and cold, began to crack. You've left us with nothing, she whispered. No, I corrected her. You left yourself with nothing. I simply reminded you of the price. She stood there a long while, as if unsure whether to scream or plead. But pride kept her silent. She gathered her things, straightened her shoulders, and turned to leave. Just before the elevator doors closed, she looked back at me. You really are a viper. I gave a soft chuckle. No, Layla. I was a mother. You made me a viper. The doors shut. And for the first time in years, the air in my home felt clean. After Layla's exit, the world outside my penthouse began to rattle. Articles, speculations, boardroom collapses. The media had a field day with headlines like, Brickmore implodes, silent matriarch behind company's collapse. Did Evelyn Moreau pull the strings all along? Luxury real estate giant faces bankruptcy as family drama unfolds. I read them all with my morning coffee. No lawyers knocked on my door. No subpoenas. Because every move I made was calculated, clean, and legally bulletproof. If there's one benefit to growing old in silence, it's the freedom to observe, record, and prepare while everyone else underestimates you. My phone rang off the hook. Journalists, former friends, even rival CEOs I hadn't heard from in a decade. All curious. All eager to hear my version. I gave them none. I issued no statement. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest statement of all. But privately, I began making calls. The properties once tied to Brickmore? I had secured them under new holding companies, quietly placing loyal managers in charge. Projects that once bore my son's name were now undergoing rebranding. The skyline wouldn't lose its towers, it would simply forget the hands that once claimed to raise them. And with the right whispers, Brickmore's former partners began turning to me. I became the quiet matriarch behind new ventures, Greenline Developments, Voss and Moreau Estates, Whitthorne Properties, all names built to blend, to evolve, to rise again without the taint of betrayal. You see, I never wanted an empire with my name carved into every stone. I never needed marble busts or charity galas to feel powerful. I just wanted to build something that lasted beyond ego and greed, something that mattered. And in destroying Brickmore, I planted the seeds of something pure. I wasn't rebuilding for Marcus or for Layla. I was building for the people like me, women who had their names erased from boardroom walls, their ideas stolen and signatures questioned. Brickmore was the price I paid for loving blindly. These new ventures? They were the reward I earned for finally loving wisely. And I did it all from this very chair, wrapped in cashmere, watching the world spin beneath my window. One morning, weeks after the last Brickmore office shuttered its doors, I received a letter, not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten envelope. The script was Marcus's. I recognized it immediately. He had learned to write like that because I once told him calligraphy made a man's mind feel precise. I opened it slowly, not with dread, but curiosity. Mother, you win. I don't know what else to say. The company is gone. Layla filed for separation yesterday. She says I'm useless without the money. Maybe she's right. I've been staying in a rental outside the city. I lost the penthouse, the cars, everything. I suppose now I know what it feels like to be forgotten. I keep thinking about when I was 10 and you taught me how to read stock tickers from the Wall Street Journal. I remember thinking how magical it was, that you could just look at symbols and see the future. I never meant to hurt you, but I did. And I'm sorry. If you never want to speak to me again, I understand. Marcus, I reread it 3 times. Then I placed it in a drawer, neither forgiven nor discarded. Just recorded. Because remorse, when delivered too late, feels like counterfeit currency. It may resemble truth, but it can't be spent. Marcus wasn't a monster. He was weak. And weakness invites monsters like Layla to feast. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting what I had built, and what I could still build. Yet some part of me ached. Not for the empire, but for the little boy who used to run into my office wearing a tie too big for his neck, pretending to be CEO of Snacks and Juice. I could still see his eyes in that letter. But I wasn't ready to meet them. Instead, I focused forward. I commissioned a discreet biography, not of me, but of the real origin of Brickmore. The anonymous investments, the shell trusts, the unseen architect behind its rise and fall. It wouldn't be a bestseller. It wouldn't air on primetime television. But it would exist. In law libraries. In academic halls. In archives. One day, someone digging through financial history would find it and know Evelyn Moreau was never just the mother in the background. She was the storm. They'll whisper the name again, not in scandal, but in awe. Because the woman who lost everything chose to take it all back. Quietly. Strategically. Completely. 6 months later, I hosted a gala. Not the type you see on television, no flashing lights, no magazine photographers waiting at velvet ropes. This was a private affair, held in the grand atrium of the newly renovated Crestbourne Tower. The very building Marcus once claimed would symbolize the future of Brickmore. It now belonged to Whitthorne Properties. Quietly. Legally. Entirely mine. Guests arrived in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns, each of them unaware of the building's former ownership. Or perhaps they knew, but chose silence, as the rich often do. The music was soft jazz. The champagne flowed in tall, crystal flutes. And at the center of the hall stood the new plaque, unveiled beneath a cascade of white roses. This space is dedicated to the unseen hands who build what others only dream. No names. No brands. Just truth. I watched from a distance, not from pride, but from peace. I no longer needed applause. I had grown used to invisibility. And now I wore it like a crown. Clara approached with a quiet smile. Everyone's saying you saved Crestbourne. I didn't save it, I replied. I simply returned it to steadier hands. And then, something unexpected. Marcus entered. He didn't make a scene. He didn't ask for forgiveness or attention. He stood near the entrance in a modest suit, watching the crowd, hands in his pockets. His eyes scanned the plaque, lingered on it, and then, finally, found me. I raised my glass to him. He didn't smile, but he nodded. Not in shame. Not in defiance. But in understanding. He turned and left a moment later, disappearing into the night without saying a word. It was the closest thing to closure I could accept. And the only kind I ever needed. Because this wasn't about punishment anymore. This was about reclaiming a legacy. About rewriting the story they tried to erase. And about proving, once and for all, that the quiet woman they underestimated had always been the one holding the quill. A few weeks after the gala, I visited the private vault at Halberton Trust and Preservation, the kind of place where secrets are wrapped in velvet and sealed behind biometric locks. Inside, beneath layers of climate-controlled air and reinforced steel, lay the pieces of my true history. The ones I had protected even as the world tried to forget me. I had arranged for one item to be brought into the viewing room, a painting. It wasn't extravagant, no gold frame or bold brushwork, just a simple portrait of a woman in her early 40s, sitting in a high-back chair, eyes focused, lips unsmiling. The artist had captured something subtle, intelligence wrapped in restraint, ambition buried beneath poise. The woman in the portrait was me. I commissioned it the year Marcus started Brickmore, quietly, before anyone knew I was funneling money behind the scenes. Back then, I still believed he would one day learn to see me not just as his mother, but as a builder in my own right. But he never asked about the sacrifices, the meetings I took in secret, the favors I cashed in, the deals I declined to keep his record clean. He only saw what I allowed him to see. And I suppose that was my mistake. The painting had remained in the vault all these years. I hadn't even told Clara about it. But now, with Brickmore gone and the new ventures thriving, I felt something shift. The need to remain invisible, protective, silent, strategic, was no longer as strong. I want it delivered to Crestbourne Tower, I told the vault manager. The executive suite. Shall we include a nameplate? I paused. Then I nodded. Evelyn Moreau, founder, financier, architect of legacy. It was time. Let them know who built it all. Not in anger. Not in spite. But in truth. Because when your silence has been your power for so long, speaking at last becomes an act of revolution. And I had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. It arrived on cream-colored cardstock, tucked neatly inside an envelope bearing Marcus's new return address, some modest brownstone outside the city, likely rented, possibly shared. The handwriting was his again, steadier this time, no longer trembling with desperation. Mother, I know I don't have the right to ask much, but I'm hosting a dinner, small, quiet, just family. No cameras, no boardrooms, just us. If you'd come, I'd be grateful. I've been doing some thinking, a lot of it. I've started working with a small development firm, nothing flashy, no marble floors, just real work, real hours. I'm learning things I should have known years ago. You don't have to say yes, but if you do, we'll keep a seat at the head of the table for you. Always. Marcus, for the first time since I'd pulled the strings that dismantled his kingdom, I felt something that resembled softness, not forgiveness. That would take longer, but maybe a beginning. I called Clara. Schedule a car for Thursday, early evening. No security detail. Clara raised an eyebrow. You're going alone? I nodded. It's not a trap. Not anymore. Thursday arrived with a chill in the air and golden leaves dancing across the pavement. As the driver pulled up to the quiet street, I saw Marcus standing at the door, no coat, no pretense, just a man who had been humbled. He opened the car door himself. Thank you for coming, he said. I haven't said I'm staying, I replied, but I stepped out anyway. Inside, the table was modest, wooden, clean, set for 5. Marcus, his youngest daughter, 2 of the cousins, and a space at the head, for me. Layla was gone, not just from the house, but from his life. Her name was never mentioned. I didn't ask. Dinner was simple. Roasted vegetables, soft bread, slow-cooked lamb. Not prepared by staff, by Marcus himself. I could tell by the uneven cuts, the over-seasoned potatoes. And that made it better somehow. We spoke, not about the past, but about books. About music. About his daughter's new interest in architecture. He asked, softly, would you ever teach her? And something in me cracked, just enough to let light through. Maybe, I said. At the end of the evening, he walked me to the door. I know I can't undo what I did, he said. But I see it now. All of it. And I'm trying to be better. I looked into his eyes, older, wiser, wounded. And, for the first time, I saw the boy I once knew, and the man he could still become. Then keep trying, I said. And remember whose shoulders you once stood on. He nodded. No pride. No protest. Just truth. And as the door closed behind me, I felt the cold night air kiss my cheek. Not bitter. Not cruel. Just honest. Months slipped by like warm tea cooling in the cup, quietly, softly, without fanfare. The world no longer spoke of Brickmore. New developments rose. Not under Marcus's name. Not even under mine. But under the faceless companies I'd planted with purpose. The headlines had moved on. The sharks had turned toward newer, juicier scandals. And that was how I preferred it. I spent my mornings tending to the garden terrace of my penthouse, an indulgence I had ignored for years. The roses bloomed redder than I remembered. The air felt lighter. Perhaps not because the world had changed, but because I had finally exhaled. Then, one morning, Clara entered the room holding a velvet folder. It's from the Voss and Moreau project team, she said, laying it on the table. Final reports. They're naming the community center after you. I raised an eyebrow. That wasn't part of the plan. They insisted. Said it was unanimous. A tribute to the anonymous benefactor who kept their city block alive during the crisis. Inside, a single silver-foiled card read, the Evelyn Moreau Center for Advancement in honor of the woman who saw futures in silence and gave without asking. No gala, no speech, no reporters waiting for a quote. Just a plaque, quiet and strong. Like me, I traced the edges of the card, remembering all the times I was told to stay quiet, to sit down, to let the men handle it. How many boardroom tables I sat at in silence while men took credit for the numbers I crunched, the deals I secured, the futures I foresaw. Now, I didn't need to be in the room. I was the room, the foundation, the beams, the ceiling that didn't collapse. Later that day, I walked the hallways of Crestbourne Tower again. The portrait hung silently on the wall of the executive suite, my gaze painted forever into the wood-paneled calm. Someone had left fresh, white orchids beneath it. A note tucked between the petals read, "Thank you for teaching us how to stand. One of the women you inspired." I closed my eyes. It wasn't the empire I once imagined, but it was a better one, stronger, built not on vanity, but on quiet resilience. I had been betrayed, erased, undermined, but in the end, I wasn't the victim. I was the legacy. The final chapter didn't arrive with a bang, but with a pen. A Mont Blanc, sleek, black, and capped with the same dignity I had preserved all my life. It rested in a lacquered box on my desk that morning, along with the final set of documents I had long prepared, but never signed. Clara stood beside me, quiet as always. "The foundation papers are ready," she said. "You can name it whatever you like." I looked down at the heading. The Moreau Initiative for Forgotten Builders, a foundation dedicated to supporting women over 50 who were erased from boardrooms, businesses, and breakthroughs. No marketing teams. No donors lining up for tax deductions. Just my money, my intent, and a simple mission to help others rise quietly, the way I once had to climb, with no applause, no ladder, and no net. I thought of the women I'd known, the ones who coded software in basements while their husbands won awards, the ones who nursed companies through recessions, only to be thanked with a retirement brunch and a forgotten nameplate. The ones like me, relegated to the side, but never broken. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than I expected, as if it knew this wasn't just a document. It was a declaration. I signed, and when I finished, I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. "You did it," Clara whispered. "No," I said, smiling faintly. "I just remembered who I've always been." That evening, as the city lit up below, I sat by the window, watching the skyline shimmer with buildings I had touched but never claimed. I thought of Marcus, still finding his way, of Layla likely rebuilding her life through another charade, of the portrait in Crestbourne, the foundation soon to open, the names of women that would now be remembered. And I thought of that very first signature, the one I gave so long ago to fund Brickmore in secret. Back then, I believed in someone else's dream. Now, I was building my own, not for applause, not for validation, but because I could. And for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't anyone's victim. I was the architect of every ending, and the author of every beginning.